Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us to close out day 2 of We Give Summit. Closed captioning is available for this session and all sessions at the summit. To enable closed captioning, click the button with the CC that's at the bottom of your screen. My name is Ilyasa N. Shabazz, she, her pronouns, and I am the Senior Operations and Communications Director at Philanthropy Together. We are a global initiative to catalyze the collective giving movement. I'm honored to welcome each of you to We Have the Solutions, the importance of funding Native-led efforts. Something that has really stuck with me since we kicked off We Give Summit was something that Gloria Walton was talking about in our opening session about solidarity. And she was saying that true solidarity is about listening deeply. And as some of you may have seen in the description for this session, there's a quote there from today's moderator, Carly Bad-Hartbull, that says, in part, the original people of this land need to be listened to and their needs prioritized. And so I'm really looking forward to listening in this session and learning from our 4 panelists. And I invite and encourage all of you to ask questions and share your reflections in the chat throughout. There will be time for Q&A, so please drop in your questions. At the end of the session, we'll ask you to share your feedback with a quick 2-question poll. And we also do have a book raffle that'll happen for this session. So listen out to see if you're selected to receive a book of your choice by one of this year's speakers. And judging by the engagement on Whova, I think that many of us here know that We Give Summit is a great place for us to really tap into our collective wisdom. And we're proud to be able to keep the learning going and have folks go deeper with these book giveaways. So please stick around and hopefully win one of those, be selected to select a book. And so with that, I'm going to pass it over to Carly. Welcome.
Pidamaya, thank you, Ilyasa. Really appreciate you having us here. Hamitakuyepi, Chante Washte Nape Chiuzapiye, Carly Bad-Hartbull, Emakiapiye, Damakotak, Muskogee Creek Hemacha, Nakun Wakpa Ipaksha Hemataha, Minnesota Makoche Dedwatiye, Nakun Bdeota Dedwatiye. So hello, friends and relatives. I greet you all with a handshake and a good heart. My name is Carly Bad-Hartbull. I'm a citizen of the Flandreau-Santee Dakota Nation. I'm also Muskogee Creek. I'm joining you from my ancestral homelands of Minnesota Makoche, also known as Minnesota, where I live with an amazing 6-year-old, my son Quill. Specifically, I'm in Bdeota Otunwe, or City of Many Lakes, also known as Minneapolis. I am incredibly excited to be moderating, participating in this conversation today with some of my favorite people, Shannon, Wayne, and Raymond. I'm going to be asking them to introduce themselves in just a moment, and we're going to have a conversation. We've invited you all to sit in with us. We don't have a PowerPoint, a slide deck. We don't have a Prezi. I don't know, do people even still do those? It's just us. And we're planning to reserve some time at the end to respond to questions that might come up in the chat. So like Ilyasa mentioned, please feel free to post those there. My Native Ways Federation colleague, Brittany Van Snepson, is watching the chat and is going to keep track of those for us. So miigwech, Brittany, for helping us with that. I'm the Executive Director of Native Ways Federation. Our mission is to activate and expand informed giving to Native nonprofits through donor education and advocacy. Our organization was founded by a number of national Native nonprofits, the Association on American Indian Affairs, represented here today by Shannon, also Native American Rights Fund, American Indian Science and Engineering Society, National Indian Child Welfare Association, American Indian College Fund, and First Nations Development Institute. They started coming together and they started Native Ways almost 20 years ago, over 15 years ago. And they were coming together around 2 key issues initially. One, the lack of adequate philanthropic support coming into Native nations and communities. And 2, the fact that the majority of those investments, especially the larger dollar amounts, were going to non-Native organizations and institutions. And unfortunately, that remains the case today. Prior to coming to Native Ways, I worked as a Dakota language teacher, an attorney in child welfare, and also in philanthropy. I was a program officer for about 6 years at a mid-sized foundation focused on work in Indian country. I also just want to add quickly that we have included some links in the Whova platform to resources we thought that you might find value in. We may add some more after our discussion, depending on what comes up. The one thing we discussed in our planning calls was the fact that we as Native people often we're presenting to both Native and non-Native audiences. And very often when the audiences are non-native or have a lot of non-native folks, we feel the need to start with an Indian Country 101. There's so much that folks don't know about us. And that hinders the conversation in many ways when we always feel like we have to start at that 101 level. So we're not going to do a 101 here because we want to be able to jump into the conversation around some important topics that we're excited to talk about. But we do have those resources that we'll share. Also, I should add Native Ways Federation does an Indian Country 101 session specifically geared toward foundations, public philanthropy serving organizations, donors. Native Governance Center has a training, association probably does too. We likely all do. So feel free to reach out for more information, and maybe you want to hire one of us for a more in-depth session. But today we want to jump right into the topics that are important to us as they're related to the incredibly important work that Native leaders, like these people joining us today, my friends and colleagues, are doing. We want to talk about why Native ideas and solutions need to be better supported in philanthropic spaces. So to start, I'd love if we could go around, Wayne, Raymond, and Shannon, introduce yourselves and share your experience or history as it relates to philanthropy. And Wayne, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Carly. Hamitake Chante Washte Nape Chiuzapi, Wayne Ducheneaux Machi Apie. Hello, my relatives. I greet you with a good heart and handshake, just like Carly did. We are from sister tribes. My name is Wayne Ducheneaux. I'm the executive director of the Native Governance Center. He, him pronouns, and I am an enrolled citizen of the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe. Truly honored to be here with you all today.
And Wayne, do you want to mention maybe a little bit about your connection with philanthropy?
I do, yep. So Native Governance Center, we're a Native-led nonprofit organization that serves 23 Native nations that share geography with Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota. So I'm a nonprofit leader in the philanthropic space. And then I also serve on 2 foundation boards of directors, the Northwest Area Foundation Board of Directors and the Native American Agriculture Fund Board of Directors. So yeah, sorry, I forgot that part. Thank you, Carly.
Thank you, Wayne. Appreciate it. And so happy you're able to join us today. Raymond, would you mind introducing yourself and share your experience related to philanthropy?
Sure. Thank you, Carly. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this late afternoon or evening, depending on where you're from. I'm Ray Foxworth. I currently serve as the program director for the Henry Luce Foundation, overseeing their Indigenous Knowledge Initiative. I started only 3, maybe 4 weeks ago. Before that, I was the vice president of First Nations Development Institute, which is a nonprofit located in Longmont, Colorado, that serves Native communities, especially in areas of economic and community development. I'm a citizen of the Navajo Nation. My family is from the western half of the Navajo Nation in a place called Tuba City, which has two street lights last time I was there. So don't let the city fool you, part of that. But generally, in terms of my connection to philanthropy, well, now I sit in this seat, which I'm still getting used to in terms of serving in a philanthropic organization. But for the longest time, I've been a critic of philanthropy, mainly because of their lack of action in terms of supporting Native communities. And I'll probably build on that a little later when I have some time for comments. I'll throw it to you, Shannon.
My turn. Hello, everyone. Hello, my name is Shannon O'Loughlin. I'm first and foremost a citizen of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. I currently reside on the lands of the Piscataway peoples, which is now known today as the state of Maryland, just north of what I like to call the head of the serpent, Washington, D.C. And I serve as the chief executive and attorney for the Association on American Indian Affairs. The association's the oldest nonprofit serving Indian country. We've been around, oh yeah, there's a 100, we've been around since 1922. And I started with the association back in 2017. And so my philanthropic experience really started when I became enmeshed with this organization and learning the ins and outs of how to talk to and deal with philanthropy, learning what was done before me with philanthropy, and really being disappointed at the level of support that we've been able to garner. And in fact, luckily, the association has been around a long time, and we have a lot of general public support, which has been supporting our efforts in cultural sovereignty, governance, protection of culture and sacred places, the Indian children and family, welfare and juvenile justice issues. We provide scholarships. We're the oldest organization providing scholarships to undergrad and graduate Native students. And we provide funding for Native youth summer camps. So we kind of have many roads and many paths and avenues to help support Native nations and Indigenous peoples in the United States. Thanks.
Thank you, Shannon. Thank you, Ray. So grateful you're both here today for this conversation, and thankful for your stories that you're sharing with us today. You know, one of the issues that we face is as Native communities, our population numbers are relatively small, considering how populous our communities once were in relation to the land, and the fact that now we make up almost 3% of the US population under the most recent census data. I know a lot of conversation can be had around that data, but you know, that the population, that number often hinders us. And when we look at some of the philanthropic data that's out there around, 0.4% of large foundation giving goes to Native communities. And yet at Native Ways Federation, we often say that Native communities have the solutions that are needed to both better serve our communities, our Native communities, but also on a broader scale. But we need that increased support. So one of the questions I wanted to start with was around related to that. Shannon, can you share, I think we'll start with you. Why is giving to Native-led nonprofits important to the future of this country and the planet?
Oh, that's just a simple answer there. That's not big at all.
Not at all.
So that's great. Thanks so much, Carly, for that question. That's a great question and something I'm very passionate about. Traditional knowledge is at the core of Indigenous identity, culture, languages, heritage, livelihoods, and its transmission from one generation to the next must be protected, preserved, and encouraged. I mean, the last 500 years of Western encroachment was for the purpose of actually dispossessing Native peoples of those relationships that they had built over thousands of years with the ecosystems around them, right? In fact, so many of our Indigenous creation stories are about us being placed in a specific environment for the very purpose of taking care of that land and that land taking care of us. So to answer that question, I mean, let's first talk practically. There's 574 Native nations that are acknowledged by the United States and about 400 other tribes, bands, communities that aren't acknowledged by the US. I mean, each are diverse in their cultures and values. Native nonprofits are absolutely necessary to provide that local and national support to unify solutions that can support all of Indian country, or at least work towards supporting all of Native country. And quite often, Native-led organizations may be the only ones with any capacity and understanding and working knowledge on how to provide the appropriate assistance to tribes and the public about the context and history of various issues. So let me briefly talk about Indigenous knowledge and TEK, otherwise known as tribal ecological knowledge, which is a body of observations, oral and written knowledge, innovations, practices, beliefs that promote sustainability and the responsible stewardship of cultural heritage and natural resources through relationships between humans and their ecosystem. Indigenous peoples have a healthy and necessary codependency with our ecosystems. TEK applies to phenomena across biological, physical, social, cultural, spiritual systems. And we've developed these knowledge systems over millennia and continue to do so based on evidence acquired through direct contact with the environment, long-term experiences and observations, and and our skills and expertise. So, for example, it's estimated currently at the global scale, Indigenous peoples and long-standing place-based communities manage over 24% of land, which contains approximately 40% of all ecologically intact landscapes and protected areas left on the planet, and a staggering 80% of the world's biodiversity. In short, evidence suggests that the most intact ecosystems on the planet rest in the hands of people who have remained close to nature. And Indigenous knowledge isn't just applicable to land and water use. It's really relevant to all human systems. I mean, we literally have thousands of years of knowledge in self-governance and democracy. It was the Haudenosaunee, also called the Iroquois, who taught the US founding fathers about democracy from the Haudenosaunee's Great Law of Peace, but also knowledge about healthcare and child development and recovery from disease and addiction and afflictions, and even how violations of community norms can be handled, not with punishment, but with recovery and reparations. Indigenous peoples have had thousands of years of observing the natural and human world, embracing their codependence on our ecosystems, developing agricultural and conservation practices that have protected our soils, our air, our waters, as well as nurture those relationships with fish, birds, animals at a deeper level than science has really recognized. Western science's discoveries of our Indigenous ecological knowledges are only recently becoming accepted because they've stood the test of time. What's required for Native-led nonprofits to support the 9.7 million, that 3% of Native people in the United States, is funding and attention. We need philanthropy support to open those doors to promote our knowledge for a healthier social and natural environment, and to help us all on our shared planet to relearn how to better live in this world with the environment and with each other. Thank you for that question.
Wow. Thank you so much, Shannon. That was a big question to start with, and I really appreciate you being willing to take that on.
And that was a big answer.
And that was a big answer and a really good answer. You know, when I worked at a foundation, oftentimes, you know, as one of very few Native people who were working in a foundation at the time, and there's still very few of us, glad to see Raymond over there. But oftentimes what I would hear from other folks in the field was, oh, we'd like to support Native communities, but we don't have a program area for that. And what you're sharing is whatever area you're working in, Native communities are doing work in these areas, and we have the wisdom, we have the solutions, we have the knowledge. We just need the support to be able to implement, to be able to act in the way that we need to for our communities, and also for the broader communities. Ray, Wayne, I'm wondering if either one of you want to respond to that question or add to it.
I'm good. I thought like chef's kiss for Shannon's answer. Just very, very well done.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have some more incredible questions too. So I think we'll just keep moving, but thank you for that. It's, you know, as we think about many of the issues that you brought up, Shannon, and your response to that question, so much of what's happening in the world right now, many of us think is very closely related to this disconnect as human beings from one another, disconnect to the land. And yet I keep hearing conversations around how we're in this moment of time. You know, we're in a moment of change, including in the world of philanthropy, where we are seeing more conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're seeing more initiatives in some of these spaces, which is good. And what does that mean? And I'm really curious as we think about this kind of we're in a moment statement, what you all think about that. And Ray, I'd love to get your thoughts.
Thank you, Shannon, for those great remarks in terms of that first question. And Carly, yeah, this moment, I am in a lot of conversations where I also hear that kind of language. We're in a moment, and I always I usually just roll my eyes and kind of think, yeah, what moment? And so what I think that necessitates is like we should define a bit what we mean by this moment. I think, like from a community-based perspective, we are in some kind of post-2020 moment. I kind of struggle with trying to identify or articulate what that means, but I think in part, in terms of describing that, right, we're in a moment that, you know, has seemingly passed in terms of the devastation that the COVID-19 pandemic had on communities of color across the country and Native communities especially. But we know there are still lasting effects on Native communities resulting from COVID-19. There's lasting effects on communities, on their economies, and on their families, right? I've seen a few studies that have been released talking about the devastation of COVID-19 on Native communities, where it documents that Native life expectancy overall declined between 4 to 6 years as a result of the pandemic. So like if we talk about this moment, we have to acknowledge that we're in some kind of post-pandemic devastation moment, seemingly. Though I think most Americans forget that devastation did occur in Native communities and really did impact the lives of Native people. But I think with that, we're in a moment where there's still vibrant work taking place in Native communities. You know, there's an active and vibrant civil society. Native nations and community organizations are actively working for the protection and preservation of Native sovereignty, land, resources, cultures, and families. But I also think defining this post-2020 world, we have to also acknowledge that we're about 3 years removed from the unprecedented global protests that occurred in the summer of 2020 in support of Black Lives Matter. Those historic protests, I think, gave many of us hope, at least I had hope at that moment, that we were moving in some sort of positive direction where people of color prioritized in philanthropy and other sectors of American society. But I think we have to question if that has indeed happened. In terms of philanthropy in this moment, you know, I think part of this moment is acknowledging, sort of as you did, all the ongoing conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion that are taking place. Sometimes, you know, some foundations spice it up and throw in justice. But, you know, those conversations have been going on for at least 10 years now. And most foundations are in some planning phase, or they're hiring an equity officer or doing those types of things around diversity, equity, and inclusion. But I think for me, when I think about philanthropy in this moment, the essential question that I think we all should ask is, are these conversations changing practice, right? Are we seeing changes in how foundations operate? Are we moving from a practice where philanthropic institutions are embedded in a culture of white supremacy to a space where Native cultures, Native communities, Native organizations are better resourced and prioritized in foundation giving? I think from my perspective, and I'm going to be a Debbie Downer here and just say, you know, I don't know if this is actually a moment, or if I don't buy the hype. And I don't buy the hype in large part because if we look at almost every empirical indicator that's available to us to understand if philanthropy is moving towards some better space, at least in relation to Native communities, you know, the data is pretty dismal, right? If we look at staff and boards of foundations, they're predominantly white. Change Philanthropy, I know, has been trying to give some snapshot of diversity among people in philanthropy, and their 22 report notes that roughly the same number of Native people worked in philanthropy as was documented in the 2015 Council on Foundations report, State of Change. That total number is less than 1%. And when you translate that percentage into a raw number, that's about 30 to 40 Native individuals that work in philanthropy. Also, before this panel, I did look up the Investing in Native Communities data map that was produced by Candid and Native Americans in Philanthropy. I just looked up the trends of giving from 2017 to 2020, because the 21-22 data is a bit wonky still and being updated. But when we look at that data, like we see the number of funders that are supporting Native communities and causes has decreased over time. The amount of money going to Native communities and causes has also decreased. The same downward trends exist when we look at recipients that are supported and grants that are awarded. So this includes 2020, right? This includes the so-called year of racial reckoning that happened in philanthropy. But I raise all this because if we're talking about this moment, we have to acknowledge that we're talking about a moment where there are less resources flowing to Native communities, less foundations investing, and so on. But I also think that's connected to something else that's occurring at this moment, and that's also a backlash against diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is not only occurring in society at large, but this is occurring in philanthropy as well, right? In terms of society at large, we know that the sovereignty of Native nations is still under attack. In philanthropy, we know Native people are still invisible. And there's really nothing being done to change this, at least on the part of settler society. But I don't want to leave everything like on a depressing note, but I will say this, I've spoken on these kind of topics before in terms of philanthropy and Native communities and trying to think about how philanthropy can do better. And I think some of that is some of the things we've talked about already, like get informed, collaborate better with Native communities, and there are a host of other recommendations. But I think the real big recommendation in terms of how philanthropy can do better is like, you just need to stop talking about DEI, and you need to invest and prioritize Native communities. Like we need action, not like enough conversation, right? At the community level, we know the work is going to be ongoing. I mean, the work to preserve Native life, land, and sovereignty, that's been ongoing since first contact with European colonizers, and that's going to be ongoing. And as you said, Carly and others, right, that work checks all the boxes in terms of what philanthropy says they're looking for, in terms of what they want to support, in terms of innovation, proven models, and so on, all that other philanthropic jargon. It may not look like it does in urban areas, but the work is ongoing and has been ongoing. But all that's to say is that what that means is the work is really on the part of philanthropy to get serious in terms of sort of how they're supporting communities, and especially in this context, Native communities.
Thank you, Ray. It's so helpful to hear your thoughts on this, because it's something I've been struggling with myself. And, you know, when I think about, you know, is this a moment? We're always in a moment, right? And moments are fleeting. And where's the accountability in that? And so, you know, I appreciate the when I hear folks talking about we're in a moment, you know, trying to get folks to come together. I understand that. And from an Indigenous perspective, you know, I've been working really, really hard on trying to learn what it means to be present. What does it mean to be present? To recognize that you're always in a moment, to honor the past, to bring that with you, to be thinking about the future and all of the actions that you're doing on a daily basis. And that's something that I think, you know, when we think about the under-resourcing of our communities, we're doing all of this incredible work now. Imagine if we had those resources that we desperately need, imagine what we could accomplish. You know, if we thought about this as more of a long-term, not just a moment in time kind of thing. Wayne, Shannon, I'm curious if either one of you have anything you want to add.
I have a quick thought, if that's okay, Shannon. To build off your point, Carly, about being present, I think, and I'll try to be the opposite of Debbie Downey here for Ray for a little bit of balance, right? I think, regardless of what's going on in the world of philanthropy, this moment for me about Native people is that we are, not only are we thinking about how to be present, but we're thinking about how to be visible and how to be heard. when you look at Native representation overall across the country, you're seeing some big strides, whether it's, Deb Haaland as Secretary of Interior, Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan in Minnesota. You're seeing shows like Reservation Dogs on FX winning awards. You're seeing this rise of indigeneity that is based on all of that foundational stuff that Shannon had talked about, right? That is almost the antithesis of the lack of movement that we're seeing that Ray's talking about, right? And that's the thing I think about Indian country in particular that's exciting for me when we're thinking about this moment is we're no longer being passive about this, right? We're getting folks like Ray in positions, and I say we, Ray, I'm taking credit for you to get at the Luce Foundation, don't worry, but we are getting folks positioned in places where we can start having that influence, tapping into that indigenous wisdom that Shannon talked about, so that we can effectuate change on our terms. I'm gonna talk a little bit more about that in my question, but I think that's the thing that excites me about this moment is Native Indian country, we're not standing by anymore. We're standing up, we're being visible, and our voice is being heard more and more.
I love it. And you said everything I was thinking. Thank you so much, Wayne. I really appreciate what you all are saying about this, and I don't have anything to add.
Yes, thank you so much, Wayne. So I think this, as we're thinking about what changes we want to see, what does, Raymond, you talked about seeing changes in practice. What kind of changes? What does it look like to actively support Native nations, communities, and people? And what does that look like specifically for non-Native people to support our communities? Wayne, can we start with you?
Yes, thank you. I think where that starts when we're thinking about actively supporting Native nations is non-Native folks have to ground themselves in some truth, right? It's only in grounding yourself in truth you can get to be in a place where you can actually have reconciliation. We see some great work with our First Nations relatives in Canada around this issue in particular. And one of those fundamental truths as the governance guy, I just want to make sure that folks understand is for non-Native people to realize that your right to occupy space on this continent does not come from United States sovereignty. It does not stem from the sovereignty of the state with which you reside. Your right to occupy space in this country comes from tribal sovereignty. The resources that foundations control come from tribal sovereignty, right? And whether it's through treaty and cessation or outright theft of those things, right? All of that stuff, that the resources of philanthropy, the right for people to occupy space, like I said, is rooted in this tribal sovereignty. And I think in order to actively support Native nations, you have to make the effort to understand. This may mean, instead of inviting Native people to your 25th floor glass window boardroom to present to you about issues they're facing, it may mean you getting some folding tables down in a Native community, pulling up folding chairs and sitting around a table. And instead of offering that 1 or 2 spaces in your boardroom, making space for community to join you at the table in the community. Because you said it earlier, Carly, the solutions for Indian country issues are there. It's about access to resources and creating and building that capacity. And so for funders to understand, we're long past the time that we bring in Indian folks to open up events with prayers, right? If you're not going to include Native people in your programming, all of that programming like we talked about, where Native folks are working in every one of those sectors, don't bother coming. Right? You need to show up and you need to be ready to listen. I love the quote Ms. Shabazz gave about true solidarity is about listening deeply. And that's what foundations have to do. And the other thing I think, obviously, if we look at recent research, like the Reclaiming Native Truth research study, one of the biggest things out there, I think 76% of folks said that they weren't properly educated about Native people. So there's a fear of the unknown, right? And I think to actively support Native nations, the one fundamental thing you have to understand is if you approach the work with humility and you come to it with a good heart, Indian country will accept you and they will work with you. And the way you know you're really in is when we start teasing you and we start giving you hell. And so that's how you'll tell that you're truly doing great work in Native community, you're actively supporting, is we'll start teasing you. And I think, obviously, it also looks different how you work with a Native nation, understanding tribal sovereignty, how you work with communities and issues they're facing, and then down into those individual people. If you're running a fellowship program, right? It's really about understanding this totality of that is this Indian country, when we're not a monolith, like Shannon said, 574 federally recognized tribes, 400 or so non-federally recognized bodies. And so really actively supporting Native nations is about learning, it's about listening, and it's about showing up.
Thank you so much, Wayne. Shannon, anything you would want to add about how folks can actively support Native nations, communities, and people, specifically thinking about non-Native people? Oh, you're on mute.
I couldn't find my cursor. I mean, what's interesting, being the organization who we are as a national organization, we get a lot of different inquiries from the public, and quite often we get phone calls on how, oh, I think I can solve your problems. Plans and ideas coming from non-natives. We hear the same thing from philanthropy, who thinks they have the answers of how to resolve resolve our terrible statistics that we have in Indian country when it comes to health and prevention and suicide and so many other horribles. And I believe one of the reasons why that's so horrible is because others have been in control of how those programs come into our nations, and quite often they'll come in, they'll bring a pot of money, and in 3 years they're gone. And then someone new comes in the door and gives us a pot of money, and in 3 years they're gone, and so is their program. And they're gone because the problem isn't fixed, and they're disappointed and they're frustrated. And it's because they've never come into our nations asking us what we need. And allowing us to lead the charge, right? And so I think the best way that non-natives can help us is to let us lead. We know what our communities need on the ground, and it's so impressive what individuals in our communities are doing to help youth and help elders and others who are needing healthcare. Or what have you. We have the answers, we truly do. We just need some help with manpower and funding, and I think we can do great work. And so finding those partnerships in philanthropy or with members of the public who wish to volunteer, that's the sweet spot, when folks come hand in hand to partner with us and let us lead the charge.
Thank you, Shannon. Ray, anything you would add?
Yeah, I don't think I have anything to add, but I'll just say that in terms of specific recommendations, because I agree with what both Wayne and Shannon have said, but I do think part of that is also like funders do have to acknowledge that things are just going to look and work differently in Native communities, and that could be for a variety of reasons. It could be because of size, it could be because of history, it could be because of a whole host of factors. But I say that because I'll give an example. When I was at First Nations Development Institute, we hosted a funders gathering around Native languages, and we specifically Native language immersion programs and the ways philanthropy can support Native language immersion programs. Right, there's a lot of scholarship that documents the benefits of not only dual language learning, but also immersion as a model for language learning, retention, acquisition, and so on. Funders came to that meeting, they were somewhat interested, but really what they told us is this doesn't fit within any of their traditional programs. It doesn't fit within their education programs. It doesn't fit within these other programs. These language immersion institutions in Native communities are schools. They are schools. And the fact that philanthropy can't get past that, the fact that this looks a little different than a school that they send their children to. I mean, that's a real big barrier. So I think really just coming in with a little bit of humility that, just because you don't see it in terms of like in your everyday life, that the work shows up a little different, and you have to be humble enough to acknowledge that these communities, Native communities, know what they're doing in terms of how they're doing the work that they're engaged. So yeah, that's all I would add.
Thank you, Ray. And what I'm hearing from all of you is a lot around the importance of listening, and then what do you do with it? So once you've learned, because we talk about education, the importance of education, the importance of educating yourself, but there's also that accountability piece that once you're given the gift of knowledge, that's a responsibility and you need to do something with it. And not just to decide that what needs to be done and because it matches your program criteria, but listening to Native people who are saying, no, this is what we need. And that may require a different way of thinking, and that's okay. And that's a gift too. And so I really appreciate all of your responses to that question. We're running a little low on time, and I do want to be able to get to any questions that might have come up in the chat. But really quick, I am going to put in a plug for Native Nonprofit Day. So Native Ways Federation, we launched this Given Days initiative last year. So this is our second year of Native Nonprofit Day. It's the third Friday of every February. This year it's on May 19th. Please, please, please reach out, nativenonprofit.day. You can go to nativenonprofit.day, get more information. We just did a session earlier today about how different things that funders and donors should know about supporting Native communities. It was a little bit more of a 101. We have another session specifically for Native nonprofits, knowing how to participate. We have free resources, tools, graphics, fact sheets with, I know I did notice in the chat, some folks were interested in some of the data. We include some of the resources where some of this data has come from. So please take a look, sign up, and then on throughout May and leading up to Native Nonprofit Day, please share information about the importance of giving to Native communities and specifically to Native-led. We would really appreciate it. So thank you, Brittany, for putting those links in the chat. Really appreciate it. And we want to make sure we answer any questions. Brittany, I know you were keeping track. Were there any questions specifically that came up? And if anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat so we can get to them. Okay.
There was some questions about one person wondered if panelists could share any insights in terms of work, engagement, and collaboration with Afro-Indigenous communities.
That's a great question. I don't know of, and I'm curious if anybody else on the panel does, of any organizations that's a focus. I know of some incredible leaders out there doing work. That definitely is a important, part of our demographic, part of our populations, our communities, our families, and I think Raymond spoke to a little bit, but the importance of recognizing that in this moment, or these moments that we're in, coming together and that we're stronger together. And so I definitely think I would be really interested in a conversation that was focused on that. I have not been a part of one. We don't have any representation on this panel, in large part because we could only, find a few folks for this one panel. And when you consider the incredible diversity in Native communities, this isn't the most diverse panel as it could be. There are a lot of folks that are left out, unfortunately. But we wanted to give you just kind of a snapshot into some of what we're thinking, and would love to know if anybody does know about any organizations who are focused in that area. I don't know, Wayne, Ray, Shannon, if any of you do.
I don't know of any work specific to Afro-Indigenous causes because, especially in the work that we see, Native people don't generally quantify ourselves by that. We are citizens of our people, we are citizens of our tribe, And so when we're working for one, we're working for all in that way. So I'm not aware of, but to your point, Carly, there are definitely many Afro-Indigenous leaders out there that are out working either as elected tribal leaders, key tribal administrative staff. They're at national, regional, local organizations doing good work supporting Indian country issues. But I'm not aware of any particular Afro-Indigenous led organizations.
Thank you, Wayne. I think we have time for one more question. Brittany, was there another question that came up that we can respond to? And we'll take a look at some of the other questions and maybe include some information in the HUVA.
Yep, there were 2 or 3 more. One is for giving circles eager to fund Native-led serving groups, are there good resources that you can suggest?
Headwaters Foundation would be an organization to reach out to. I know they've done some work with giving circles. I don't know if Ray, Shannon, Wayne, if you have any other suggestions.
But not in terms of, are they talking about the administrative function or like just identifying organizations and groups? In terms of identifying organizations and groups, I always refer people to 2 places. One is First Nations Development Institute they on their website post the grants that they make. They have a grant making database, and all of those are Indigenous led, Native led organizations. So that's one resource in terms of identifying organizations. And the other place you can look is the Candid link that was dropped in the chat, I believe, which is investing in Native communities. Not all of those organizations are Native led. A lot of those organizations are Native serving, which, I qualify Native led organizations as those that are mission focused on supporting Native communities and those that are governed by a majority of Indigenous peoples. And on the Candid website, it sort of has organizations that also serve Native communities. The data is also coded by foundations. There's some problems, but anyway, that's also a resource.
Absolutely. Thank you, Raymond. And we're in conversation with the folks at Candid about working through some of those data issues along with Native Americans and philanthropy, because they definitely do exist, and those distinctions are important. Well, we are running up on time here. If we missed your question, I apologize, but we'll make sure to get information. Please also feel free to reach out directly. You can contact me at cbadharpel@nativeways.org, and maybe we can help answer your question beyond this moment of this one session. So with that, Shannon, Ray, Wayne, Pidamaya, thank you for sharing your time and knowledge. I'm so honored to be in this space working with you all. You're doing such incredible work towards systems change, nation building, community building, and I'm just really grateful for all of you. So thank you so much. And thank you everyone for participating, for coming to our session. And we hope that we can stay in communication in one way or another.
Thank you so much, Carly, Raymond, Shannon, and Wayne, for this session. And I hear the call to action for us as philanthropists: invest and prioritize Native communities, as was said. And so with Native Nonprofit Day coming up, I really challenge everyone on this call: learn about Native-led organizations in your area, share about a Native-led organization on your social media, make a donation, and do what all of us as collective givers do really well and intentionally, and that's give. Give with our heart, give with, yes, to give. And so I don't want the conversation to stop here. The chat can, I know there were some questions that we didn't get to. Please drop them on HUVA. We also have a new LinkedIn group for folks in the collective giving movement. We'll drop the link as well. And please, let's keep this conversation going. It can't stop right here. And so before we call it a night, we're going to launch a 2-question poll about this session. It should launch in just a bit. There we go. And a big congrats to our book raffle winner from this session, Melody Garcia. Melody, congrats. We will follow up with you via email in the coming days and confirm which book you'd like and your mailing details. And so thank you again, everyone, for joining us. And I hope to see you all back here tomorrow for our third and final day of We Give Summit. We kick off at 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific with a session featuring Carlos Saavedra, the founder of INE Institute. And the session is called Pushing for Systems Change, How Social Movements Can Shift Society. And we have lots of sessions tomorrow, but I also hope everyone will come back for our closing session at this same time tomorrow, where we'll toast and go out in unity with a performance by the Bay Area's Glide Ensemble and Change Band. So wishing everyone a great night, a good morning, a happy afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Be well, and we'll see you later. Bye.